Hi, I'm Kitsap County Commissioner Rob Gelder, and welcome to this episode of Commissioner's Corner. Today we will be interviewing and working with folks from our engineering division of our roads department, where before we may have seen some road projects, but now you'll have an inside look at what it takes to bring a road project to fruition. So stay tuned and you'll learn a lot. Well, welcome back. And so joining me now is Tina Nelson, who is the Senior Program Manager for the Engineering Division of the Roads Department. So Tina, thanks so much for being part of the program.
Thanks, Commissioner Gelder. I'm glad to be here.
So we've had a chance to be out on the road, seeing projects come to fruition, but there's so much more that happens behind the scenes. So I was hoping that today we could talk about that a little bit. So what does the Engineering Division do?
Yeah, and we're definitely behind the scenes. 3 to 4 years before you see anything out on the ground, that's the kind of work that we do. And the engineering division, we deliver capital projects. And capital projects are those that improve your infrastructure, not maintenance. So it is the new intersections, the widened roads, the new shoulders, the new traffic signals. That's what we do, cradle to grave. We start with a planning process, and then we go through design, survey, and then we end up with going out to bid for a contract and build a project.
So how many staff does it take to make that happen, or at least here in Kitsap County?
Yeah. So in Kitsap County, we have 46 individuals that work on my team, and the majority of those people work on our capital projects. There are a few other things we do. Bridge inspections. We also take care of the county records for roads. We do real estate services where we help people with easements and vacations. We work on purchasing property when we need it. And we also do all the permit inspections for right-of-way permits. But capital is our key task.
Okay, so how do we decide what projects are out there to become a capital project?
That is a process that our planning with involvement of everybody in Kitsap County, including our community groups, to find the projects that are needed.
Okay.
And needed in the sense of what would you like to see, as well as we're looking at safety records and capacity improvements that are needed. They then get on to what is called the Transportation Improvement Plan, and then that becomes our budget, and we implement that with moving the capital projects forward.
So all those projects then are scored by any number of different criteria, like you said, safety and so on and so forth. But I would imagine funding is a big part of deciding what projects we can actually get on the ground.
Absolutely. Most of our projects, of course, in most of the projects we work on are in the road fund. And the road fund, the money comes from the gas tax and also from a variety of grants. So when we score grants, that helps a lot for us to do our projects. And but for the rest of it, the money comes from the road fund. So not every day, not the money that goes to the jail or to the sheriff. It's anything that goes into the road fund and the gas tax. So when you pump your gas, you pay for money to get road improvements in Kitsap County.
Which is a little side, the state has not increased the county road tax in a number of years. So we have been doing more with less over and over again. So would it be possible to kind of walk through a project?
Absolutely. I think that's a great way to tell the story of what it is that we do before we head to construction. And I would like you to have that conversation with one of our project managers, Tim Beachy.
Great. Well, let's get Tim.
Awesome. Thanks you very much.
Thank you. So joining me now is Capital Improvements Project Manager, Tim Beachy. Thank you very much for joining the program today.
Bet.
So I know that the Washington Boulevard project is about to get underway here in Kingston.
It is.
So I think that'd be a great project to illustrate sort of how does it all come to be. So can you tell us a little bit, how long have you been working on that project particularly?
So I was assigned that project in mid to late 2016, or actually 17, but the impetus of it came from the Complete Streets, which was started in 2016.
Okay. So it started from a planning document.
It did.
In that case, a fairly comprehensive planning process that we did with the
was.
Kingston community. It was identified as it was assigned to you.
It was.
And so it's now, for our viewers, it's now early 2020. So we're
3.5 years later.
3.5 years.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Is that typical length of time for a project to?
This one was a little bit longer than the typical, but it's not unusual. And some of the reasons were, for instance, we're crossing the state highway twice. So anything that we do in the state highway, WashDOT, Department of Transportation, they need to approve that. So that's an iterative process that can lengthen it somewhat.
Okay. Are there other elements that can potentially come to play that might slow something down?
Absolutely. So you and Tina talked about funding. So in this case, we had some federal funding. And when you have federal funding, they also need to review all your documents. And the one in particular that could extend it is all of our right-of-way needs. If we have any properties that we need to construct this project, that needs to be reviewed internally and then sent to WashDOT, and they need to actually approve that. And that is typically a year-long process. So we have to get through a significant part of design before we can do that.
Wow, okay, so you get through design, you have everybody, all the various parties involved,
Right.
kind of give their blessing to proceed. And so what's one of the first things that needs to be done?
So that's a good question. As we back up to the start of design, it comes to the project manager. He will need to have a design team. Okay. So in this case, we need to select a consulting team. We have inside design staff that also does our projects. In this case, we had a consultant. So we selected the consultant, and then we need to have survey. We really can't start design until we have survey. So Ken Newman, our lead survey supervisor, he could probably go through the process of what they do to get the data that we need to actually start the design process.
Okay, well, let's talk to Ken.
Okay.
Perfect. And joining me now is Ken Newman, who is the county surveyor. Ken, thanks so much for being part of the program. So, under this scenario, we have the Washington Boulevard project that we're talking about, and you have then been asked, or you and your team have been asked to go out to a particular job site, and because we're going to undertake the design.
Correct.
So what do you do?
One of the first things we typically do is we do some research. We're actually doing two different things. We're creating a planimetric base map, which we will create a 2D and a 3D digital terrain model. And we're also looking at right-of-way, so we can determine the county right-of-way for the road system. And then we prepare those items into a format so that we can give that to our design teams. As part of that, we're looking for, we have coordinates and elevations that we can define our position on the Earth's surface so that we can give that, and then we prepare that base map as well.
So I'd imagine that's all being input in an electronic format these days.
Correct.
As opposed to way back when.
Right.
When you took all of that and had to draw it out.
Yes, so now we collect all our data electronically, whether it be in a data collector, or now we actually have a 3D high definition scanner that we will utilize, and we have thousands and thousands of points, and then we interpret and bring that data into the data sets and create digital terrain models from that, as well as planimetrics.
Very cool. So for those who may be watching the program and not familiar with the surveying process, how do you become a surveyor?
You can actually be trained on the job. I myself actually have a 4-year degree in surveying, but a lot of people actually come up through the ranks, so to speak. They're trained on the job, and then you eventually take your exam and become licensed, similar to an engineer.
Now, you mentioned doing research. Have you ever been out on a site where what the measurements you're taking and sort of existing maps don't quite mesh?
That happens all the time.
Oh, okay. What do you do about that?
So it depends. It can be both, again, from a mapping standpoint, we can find out that maybe our control isn't, or we have differences in just the measurements because of instrumentation. Historical data that we're looking at could be from the 1850s or even earlier. And that data can be, again, you have someone that might have chained versus electronic measuring today. If it's going to kind of the deed research, that can be because again, various systems that they were used, or they may the position itself may not be there anymore. So people have, or previous surveyors may have reset a monument, and those are not in the right location. So there's various things that we have to look at and evaluate and look at the evidence to make those determinations.
So you collect all of it, you put it into a model, you hand it off to a design team. Do you stay involved, or when do you come back on the site, if at all?
We do stay involved. Typically, during the design, they may need some additional information to further and better the design. And then typically, we do whatever we can. We create the right-of-way plans so that our right-of-way group can purchase properties. And then when it gets ready for construction, we will take those plans when they're final, and then we'll start calculating the points that we're going to have to go out and stake for the contractor to start building the project.
Okay, very cool. So it's not one and done, you are involved in the process throughout.
We're usually the first ones in, and sometimes the last ones out. Yep.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. Yep. And I think I'll go back to Tim and see what he does with the information you give him.
Absolutely.
Perfect, thank you. So Tim, welcome back. We just learned from Ken what the surveyors do. So he's input everything and handed it back to the design team. What happens?
So this is where the real fun starts, because there is an idea of what the project should be. It came from the public in this case, and the complete streets. And then we have all the details to see, does it really fit? And oftentimes we find out it doesn't always match in with what the vision was. For example, we show a nice wide sidewalk towards the water, but that was actually on private property or on port property. So the design team needs to resolve that either through acquiring the property or an easement or a redesign. Another fun part of the design process is that we continue to gather ideas. And in one case, we gathered an idea from your office. And I have a question for you. Do you recall what that idea was?
I think it has something to do with the parameters of the project.
It was, and we were talking about road closure on Washington Boulevard for just pedestrians, and you raised the question, should we consider closing a small portion of 2nd Avenue as well? And we said, that might be a great idea. We took it back to our traffic engineer, and we all thought that's a great idea. So that's an example of how the process of design is not just the engineers, it continues to have public involvement throughout the process.
So when does we gather that public involvement, and I appreciate the suggestion being taken seriously, but at some point in time I would imagine, when do you have to say we have to go, and we've done a tweaking and we just have to commit and keep that project going forward?
That's always a challenge, but we have a 30%, a 60%, and a 90% milestone that we have in our schedule, and once we hit those milestones, we tend not to want to go back and look at it. So we hit those, and that's how we drive it forward. And it's never perfect. Until the very end, we keep wanting to tweak, but we can't. And so we get to the final design and hold it firm. And then in that process, I mentioned we may need property to accomplish the project, and that's a time-intensive process. So Molly Foster, our real estate services supervisor, could kind of guide you through or talk to you about that process and what that entails.
Great, well thank you. I think I will talk to Molly.
Right.
Joining me now is Molly Foster, who is the Real Estate Services Manager for Public Works. And Molly, thanks so much for being part of the program.
Good to be here.
So Tim was talking about right-of-way. Sometimes we have a project and we need to have a little bit more room to accommodate the project. So how do you become involved? What is right-of-way? And how do we kind of move that project along?
Well, we try to get involved a little earlier than we ever used to, so that we can anticipate any impacts that the project might have to private owners. And once it is decided that we need a certain amount outside of what our existing right-of-way is, which is another name for roadway easement, then it's our job to go out and negotiate those property rights with the owners. So we like to refer to right-of-way as a super easement. A lot of people think it is a complete ownership of the agencies, but it's really an easement designated for roadway use. And inside of those roadway limits, it also hosts many utilities.
Gotcha. So sometimes then you have to go through the process of negotiating with the property owner for a little bit more. How do you determine how much of the property you need, and then what's the process for actually determining what the value might be?
The basic process is that we designate how much we need. We go out and we look at comparable sales in the before condition, before the project was ever there, and then in the after condition. And the difference is how we typically value that right-of-way. Easements are a little different. They're a reduced amount because they don't take away the whole bundle of rights of that area. And then in addition to that square foot value, we also add any kind of improvements that are within that acquisition area.
So in this case, maybe if owned property and you had sidewalks added to the road frontage, that would be something that would be factored into the valuation of the easement.
Yes,
Okay.
and we typically buy those in right-of-way because they render the area useless to the property owner for use. They can claim the square footage or maybe use some of that area for recreational, but it typically takes away their rights to that area.
Have you ever worked with someone where they just weren't willing to sell the right-of-way?
It is often an initial reaction, but my team does a really good job at explaining their rights as well as the process, and also, you know, what they have allowances to have our offers reviewed, and that we strive to avoid condemnation at all costs. We try to work with the owners to resolve any issues that they have, and we have a really good record. We have only had to condemn twice in the last 30 years.
I think I might have been involved with just one of those. And yeah, that was definitely a tough spot to be in.
Right.
So what else does the Real Estate Services Division do?
We do pretty much everything to do with real estate. We hire, or we serve other departments, the parks property or the parks department a lot. We also work for the commissioners at times. We purchase property for other reasons outside of right-of-way. We work for stormwater, sewer utility, solid waste. We're currently looking for a property to relocate the North Road Shop. We have also assisted the city of Paulsbo and the city of Port Orchard because they don't have the staff that's approved to do that acquisition for government agencies.
Oh, okay. So it's the soup to nuts, so to speak, when it comes to real estate, whether it's right-of-way easements or the acquisition or disposition of property.
Right.
Oh, well, great. Well, thank you so much for being a part of the program. I'm going to take the information about right-of-way acquisition and talk to Tim a little bit more.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, so Tim, we now have the right-of-way we need, and you've got a complete design. What
Right.
comes next?
So we package all this up into contract documents, and then we get ready to go out to bid. So the project has been designed, and then we need to go out and select a contractor.
Okay, so is that, I know we've heard the term before, plan sets. I mean, is that really what we're talking about?
We are.
Something
Right.
of that
We're
nature,
talking about-
which can be
Talking about
substantial.
a large plan set. In this case, the contract documents was like 600 pages long, so we have staff that compile all that, and then the contractors can review that, and then they bid on that set of documents.
So you're required to go out for a bid, or can you work with any contractor that you've worked with in the past?
That's a great question. We are required to select the lowest responsive bidder. So no, we cannot just go out and select any contractor.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it. I don't think everyone understands that
Right.
when it comes to public works projects and pretty much anything that's paid for by the county or public dollars, is that we have to go out to bid and
Right.
are under state law
Right.
required to choose that lowest responsive bidder. So you've done all that, it's gone out to bid, you have a contractor. What's next? Do we
Okay.
go to construction?
Right. So, like I said, the design is the fun part. We get the documents all set up, and then comes the hard part. We go out to construction, and Steve Nichols is our construction manager. His team, they take the ideas that we had. Usually they're good, and then they actually have to construct that It'd be similar to somebody doing a remodel in their hallway and they have 10,000 people walking through every day in the rain. He has to do all these things under traffic situations and in weather with a contractor who is typically good, but also was the lowest responsive bidder.
So do you have a role, continuing role, when it goes to construction?
So I do have a role to support the construction manager. As they go through the project, they may find design challenges or utilities that we did not expect, that were not found. So if there's any redesigns or clarification, as a project manager, I would lead the team that would redesign it, but then Steve's team actually implements it. So
Okay.
I serve as a supporting role to him.
So that construction management portion basically is the steward of the design, but balancing it with the reality of the boots on the ground.
Absolutely.
And so
Right.
looks like, or sounds like, Steve's the next guy to talk to.
He is.
Okay, well, let's do that.
All right.
Joining me now is Steve Nichols, who is the construction manager for Kitsap County Public Works. Steve, thanks so much for being part of the program today.
Good afternoon, Commissioner.
So you and your team have now received plans from Tim's shop, and we have a responsive bidder, and it's going to construction. So what is it that you and your team do?
It's our job to take that set of plans, those 600 pages of specifications, and build that job to that criteria.
And so how do you go about that?
We assign an assistant construction manager to monitor the daily work. We also put out 1 or 2 inspectors on each project to monitor the contractor, making sure that they construct the project to the design and specifications.
Okay, so you then have inspectors or staff on a project every day, or what kind of frequency does
We
that?
have an inspector on that project every day. And then we have a materials engineer who comes out to the project when needed to test the materials on the project to make sure that the material in the trench is compacted to the specifications and everything, and we don't have problems down the road with the roadway.
Okay, so it's not only, I think, probably really key that there's really good communications between the contractor and your inspector, and that back and forth to make sure the project happens on time. And
Communication is the key all the way around between the contractor, the inspector, the construction manager, and anybody else that's working on a project.
so we really, with our goal of being on time, on budget, and with a really good, long-lasting product.
That's correct.
So you mentioned a little bit about testing. So how do you go about testing do you do that on site? Do you have...
We have a lab here
Okay.
in the building down on the garage level where we do proctors and sieves on backfill material for the trenches
Okay.
and stuff, and we also test our own asphalt and stuff. We're able to do that.
So that sounds really intriguing. Why don't we go check that out?
It sounds like a plan.
Okay. So now I'm in the Public Works Lab to speak with Garrett Metcalf, who is the Assistant Materials Engineer. Garrett, thanks for being part of the program.
Sure.
So why is it that Public Works has a lab?
We're testing materials for the county, that we get materials from the contractor. We're wanting to make sure that we get a quality product so that the county dollars are put to good use, and we're wanting the product to meet specifications, meeting the standard specifications that WashDOT holds to.
So we've designed a project, we have the specifications for how it should be constructed, and this is a way of assuring that the product in the field meets the specs of our designs?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
And so what all types of materials do you end up testing here to make sure?
A lot of it is soils aggregate. This is a sample of base course, crushed base course material.
Okay.
And
So base course materials, you're talking about soils, would that mostly be if they're engineered and brought in, or just to make sure that it's working and able to compact, or all that good stuff?
yes,
Okay.
some of it's native material from the job site, but a lot of it we get samples from gravel pits that they manufacture it at the pit. And
Would the same thing be for asphalt that is brought to the, you test asphalt for
Yes.
the size of the aggregate or the
Right.
oils, or?
that's right.
Okay.
Compactability, we've got to make sure that they're compacting it enough to where it's not going to rut or cause problems in the future.
Okay, so there's a lot. Oh, we've been talking in this program really about from the soup to nuts to any construction project, capital improvement project, where we're looking at from the design to the actual construction on the ground. And I think that's probably one of those things we wouldn't think about, is that we finally put out a project to bid, but we want to make sure that we're getting what we're paying for. And this is a great way to do that in a very responsive way, because we're doing it, we don't have to send it out, right? So you can, doesn't matter what day of the week.
Right.
Okay, perfect.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for giving us an inside look.
Thank you.
All right. So thanks for tuning into this episode of Commissioner's Corner. I hope you learned a lot. But as much as you've learned about the details of any one of these projects that are coming to your community, you are an extremely important part of it. And public outreach for any of our projects is important as well. The idea could be yours. We come out to you at any early part of the stages of design, and we do mailers and we do community meetings, and just want to make sure that you know you're an important part of it. But I hope you enjoyed the program, and I'll see you next time.